You everybody for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me one quick favor, see that little black subscribe button on the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, hit that little black subscribe button. Really does help this channel grow, my audience grow, and I appreciate it more than you know. Thank you again. Now, here's the video that you came here for. All right, let's switch gears to the Oregon perspective. And listen, let me say this. From the football perspective, I don't know really what there is to add that I didn't just say a moment ago. Oregon wins 42-6. They're up 35-0 at the half. And whatever, we know the stats, right? Of 500 yards of total offense. At halftime, they had more touchdowns, 5, than Colorado had first downs, 4. It was a butt kicking. Coach Prime said it himself. And I don't really know what else there is to say. This is what Oregon is supposed to look like. We just talked about the Colorado perspective. Well, Oregon is a program with multiple top 10 recruiting classes on their roster right now. They have been able to use the transfer portal, not out of necessity to flip a roster like Colorado, but to kind of plug holes and add guys that are difference makers, whether it's Bo Nix, the wide receiver Trayshawn Holden, the wide receiver or the cornerback Kyrie Jackson, both from Alabama. That's what a top 5, top 10 national championship caliber team looks like. And Oregon, to its credit, took care of business on Saturday. What I did find interesting, though, and what I do want to talk about, it was certainly a very busy weekend for coaches saying stuff that went viral, right? So we just talked about Ryan Day in the first segment, the stuff that he said, calling out Lou Holtz, old Uncle Lou, calling out Lou Holtz, okay? So, but Dan Lanning himself made some very interesting comments that certainly went viral in his pregame speech and at halftime. And I want to get to the quotes in a minute. But what I find very interesting, the quotes have created a lot of conversation. The quotes have been very interesting, but I don't think Dan Lanning said the stuff that he said for the reasons that most people seem to think. Let's get into what he said. First of all, during the game, a pregame locker room speech was shared via ESPN and ABC. Obviously ABC was the one who broadcast the game. And Dan Lanning had some very choice words for Colorado and what they have done so far. Here is what he said. And again, at some point we'll get the audio stuff just spliced in. It'll be much easier. But he said, the Cinderella story is over, man. They're fighting for clicks. We're fighting for wins. There's a difference, right? There's a difference, right? This game ain't going to get played in Hollywood. It's going to get played on grass. Then at halftime, in an interview with whoever the sideline reporter was, I can't remember off the top of my head, he was asked about being up 35-0. He said, we're not done. We're not satisfied. I hope that everybody that's been watching every week is still watching. So Dan Lanning coming in hot, baby. Dan Lanning coming in hot. And first of all, let me say this. Pre-game locker room speech, I have no problem with it. That's coaching talk. That's trying to get your guys fired up, whatever. No problem with it. Don't care, whatever. But I think to me, there are two very specific things and specific reasons that Dan Lanning said what he said in that locker room speech, said what he said at halftime. One you might think, one I bet you probably haven't given too much thought to. Why I think Dan Lanning was so fired up. I think there are two reasons. One, the first one is pretty much exactly what you think. I wouldn't say that Dan Lanning was jealous of the coverage of Oregon and Colorado this week, but I do think it's fair for him to have been a little bit frustrated. Because it's interesting, right? You know, I watch all this stuff, and I saw an interview with Marcus Freeman on campus prior to the Ohio State game on Friday. And it was 15, 20 minutes, and it was tell us about Sam Hartman, tell us about your team, what do you think about Ohio State? You're an Ohio State alum, whatever. That isn't really what Dan Lanning had to deal with in the lead up to the Colorado game. In the lead up to the Colorado game, it felt like the media was going out of their way to get Dan Lanning to say something scandalous to then bring back to Coach Prime to make and create a headline. You can agree, you can disagree, you could say it's fair, you could say it's not fair. But that was my perception from a distance. First off, people kept showing this video of Dan Lanning talking about Colorado in the summertime. And essentially what Dan Lanning said, it was right after Colorado had left the Big 12 or left the Pac-12 for the Big 12. And Dan Lanning was asked about it, and he basically said, I don't really remember Colorado doing very much in this league. And so at the beginning of the week, everybody tried to make that into a thing. Well, one, Dan Lanning never said Deion Sanders. Dan Lanning never said the name Coach Prime. Dan Lanning never said anything about any current Colorado coach or player. What he said was factually correct. He said they're leaving this league, and they haven't really done that much. And beyond that, the context that nobody wanted to add because it wasn't salacious, it wasn't scandalous, it wasn't interesting, was the fact that Dan Lanning said that at a time when Colorado was the only school that had left the Pac-12, and the Pac-12 was trying to hold itself together. Before Oregon and Washington left for the Big Ten, before Arizona, Arizona State, and Utah left for the Big 12, before, oh, by the way, Stanford and Cal left for the ACC. That was a moment in time where Dan Lanning was trying to protect his program, his players, and the Pac-12, and I have absolutely nothing wrong with it. And then, like I said, once everybody kind of realized that that wasn't a thing, and I don't even think Coach Prime was bothered by it, then it tried to turn into something else where it was like, let's catch Dan Lanning saying something controversial so we can create a headline. You can go on social media, on Twitter. I saw this video. Dan Lanning did a SportsCenter interview on, I believe it was Friday night before the game. And the first 3 or 4 questions were all about either something that he said or directly about Deion Sanders. Nothing about Colorado, nothing about the opponent, nothing about their 3-0 start, nothing about how impressed you are, nothing about Shedeur Sanders as a Heisman Trophy candidate. It was all about, can we catch Dan Lanning saying something? And so I have no problem with him being frustrated. I have no problem with him sitting there saying, wait a second now. We have a pretty good football team too. We have a top 10 team too. We have a Heisman Trophy candidate too. And if you want to talk about their team, that's fine, but don't try to get me to say something about the coach. So that's one. But 2, you know the real reason that I think Dan Lanning was really acting the way he was? Listen again to the quote that he said at halftime. We're not done yet. We're not satisfied. I hope everybody that's been watching every week is still watching. And then think about his actions during the game. When he faked a punt inside his own 20. Went for it on 4th down when they were up, whatever it was, I think 42-0. You know what that was to me? That was trying to send a message not to the current Colorado Buffaloes, not to the current Oregon Ducks. It was trying to send a message to every recruit that would ever consider either one of those schools. And let me explain, okay? Dan Lanning, first of all, comes from the Kirby Smart, Nick Saban coaching tree. What that means is it's all about recruiting all the time, 365 days a year. You eat, sleep, breathe recruiting. You're on the phone. You're texting. It's this class. It's the next class. It's the transfer portal. It's messaging to recruiting. And I think what Dan Lanning also knows is he knows that Coach Prime isn't going anywhere. And I've said this, and I believe Coach Prime is not only staying in college football, I believe he's not going to the NFL, and I think he's staying at Colorado. And I think Dan Lanning knows I got a new big dog on my recruiting block here on the West Coast. And I think what Dan Lanning realizes is Coach Prime is going to be a thorn in my side in recruiting from now until he decides to leave college football. And we're going to be going after a lot of the same players. Think about already the impact that Coach Prime has had in recruiting in 3 weeks as a college football head coach leading up to Saturday. As we've discussed previously, we know about Travis Hunter, right? We know about Cormani McClain in last year's class. But even just since Colorado beat TCU, this is what we learned. The number 1 quarterback in the class of 2025, Bryce Underwood, took a visit to Colorado. The number 2 wide receiver in America in the senior class, Ryan Wingo, is going to Colorado this coming weekend for the USC game. The number 3 wide receiver in America, Cam Coleman, committed to Texas A&M, saw that he wants to take a visit there. Jordan Seaton, one of the top offensive linemen, has already taken a visit to Colorado. And what was the other kid's name? Jeremiah Beeman, I believe his name was, committed to Alabama, 4-star recruit, difference maker on the defensive line. He too has taken a visit to Colorado. And so I bring it up. I think it's very clear from what I saw that Dan Lanning realizes this guy is going to be a problem, and I need to get the messaging out. I need to get the messaging out that you guys, that listen, that we are ourselves a good football team, a power, and a force to be reckoned with. And when I look at what Dan Lanning said and what he did and his actions, I think at a certain point, it stopped becoming about motivating his team on the field. I had my buddy Chris Perfett from Fox Sports Radio tweet at me, oh, he's just trying to rally up the troops. No, going forward up 42-0 is not trying to rally the troops. Saying, I hope everybody that's been watching every week is still watching when you're up 35-0 is not trying to rally the troops. It's trying to rally the next group of troops. It's trying to rally the kids that are sophomores and juniors in high school and say, you know what? I know you're impressed by this Coach Prime. I am too. I like the guy. I think he's a good football coach. But when I come into your locker room, when I come into your high school, when I come in to sit with your parents, just remember, he has the flash and he has the excitement and he has the cameras and he has the social media clout. But I got that dominant win over him. Now, I know what a lot of you would say. It seems a little ironic. The Oregon coach with their million uniform combinations talking about Hollywood and this and that. But I'm just telling you, this is how these coaches think. You can like it. You can not like it. You can agree. You can disagree. I'm just here to tell you that is how these coaches think. And I very, very, very much believe that that was what Saturday was about. I think the pregame stuff was hyping up his team. But I think once you get to halftime, you're still talking. Once you get into the second half, you're going for it on fourth down. That to me is all about recruiting. It's all about telling kids, hey, you can go there, but we played those guys and we kicked their butts on the field. I just want to take a quick break, come back. We'll react to the rest of the weekend in college football. Clemson. I still don't know what happened with Clemson. We'll talk about them. We'll talk about the Bama quarterback situation. We'll talk about Washington. We'll talk about maybe the Washington State coach going off. We had a lot of coaches go off this week. Quick break. Be right back. A lot more to discuss.